JR Alli, more like JR I'll eat.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Daniel Schiffer, and here are 8 tips for shooting videos in low light. First and foremost, you're going to want to use a faster lens and avoid shooting with higher ISO values. If your lens can open up its aperture to an f-stop of 2.8 or lower, this will let a lot more light into your camera's sensor, resulting in a brighter image. This will enable you to turn down that ISO value, significantly reducing the amount of that ugly noise that can ruin your shot. Now, moving along to tip number 2, you should try to shoot as much as you can in 4K. If your camera can record 4K video, you will get much cleaner footage utilizing that rather than 1080p. Now, of course, most cameras, including my own, can't do higher frame rates in 4K, so if you want to get really smooth footage in 24 frames per second, you're going to want to use a stabilizer, kind of like this guy. This right here is the Zhiyun Crane Plus. It's a 3-axis gimbal that pretty much comes with me everywhere I go. Now, aside from just being really easy to use and coming packed with all sorts of features, my favorite thing about the Crane Plus is its small size. It's actually small enough that I can store it in the laptop compartment of my camera backpack, making it the most portable gimbal for full frame cameras, at least that I've found. Our next tip is gonna help those of you who either don't have a stabilizer, or maybe you do and just wanna get some more dramatic shots. Tip number 3 is to shoot some of your footage in 30 frames per second. If you edit your footage in a 24 frames per second sequence, you can slow down 30 frames per second footage to 80% of its original speed. This will make those little bumps and shakes a lot less noticeable, while also making your footage look more dramatic. Now, you might be wondering what makes 30 frames per second so great specifically for low light. Well, for starters, if your camera shoots in 4K like we talked about before, chances are it can also do 4K at 30 frames per second. And by shooting in this frame rate, you can keep a much lower shutter speed, like 1/60, resulting in lower ISO values and much cleaner footage. Now, on the other hand, if you were to shoot in 60 or 120 frames per second, you wouldn't have any choice but to shoot with a higher shutter speed, resulting in a darker image and higher ISO values. And not only that, but generally speaking, most cameras, with the exception of a few, when shooting in these higher frame rates, they can only do it in 1080p. So you're also not getting the advantages of shooting in 4K. So that is tip number 3. Whether you're shooting with a stabilizer or handheld, give 30 frames per second a try, because there are a lot of advantages for low light shooting. So the next 2 tips are going to come from my friend JR Alli, who is known for his epic low light footage.
I love to shoot at night personally, and I feel like one thing that is super beneficial is having lights on hand to help light your situations properly. So right now we have Pat, he's using a little bit of a pink light to get that scene, that shot that you actually saw a little bit before. So whether you want a certain color scheme, you can bring out those teals and the pinks to really get a sci-fi effect, or you bring just regular lighting to help light people's faces and show emotion in your scene. I think it's super key to have some lights on hand so that you can properly light your situations. So another useful tip is actually using silhouettes. A lot of the times people like to light their subjects perfectly, but it can actually be really beneficial to use silhouettes to add drama and kind of mystery to your shots.
So when it comes to portable lighting, there's a handful of good options out there, but like JR mentioned, we were using this RGB wand, which lets you introduce all sorts of colors to your shot, or if you like, you can actually just use it as a regular LED light with adjustable power and temperature. Now, traveling with this light is as easy as just putting it in the tripod strap of your camera bag, making sure that it's nice and tight and it's not gonna fall out. Now, if that is still not portable enough for you, you can actually go for something like this Aperture M9. It's just a small LED light that obviously is the size of like a credit card, and it comes with me everywhere I go as well. Now, despite being very small, this light is extremely powerful. In fact, this is actually how I had the light set up on my camera when I was filming JR giving his tips. Okay, so let's say you don't have any portable lighting and you don't want to silhouette all of your shots. Well, what you can do is use ambient lighting and your environment to key your subjects. Bright neon signs in storefronts are one of my favorite ways to light a subject when shooting at night, and if you spend some time walking around downtown, you can actually find some interesting colors and patterns as well. So tip number 7 is kind of the opposite of our very first tip. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I said you should avoid using ISOs that are too high. And while this is entirely true, you should actually also avoid using ISOs that are too low. A huge mistake that I would make all the time was underexposing my shots because I was afraid to use higher ISOs. Now, the reality is that your shot will always look better if it's exposed correctly, even if that means using a higher ISO. Now, if you choose to use a lower ISO at the expense of underexposing your shots, you will end up losing a lot of information that can't be brought back, and if you try to brighten up these images in post, it will actually make the shot worse. Instead, you're actually better off exposing your shot properly by bumping your ISO up a couple notches and then adding some contrast back in post. Now, let's say your footage is properly exposed, but it looks quite a bit noisy. Well, our 8th and final tip is to use some sort of noise reduction software or plugin. For my videos, I frequently use the Neat Video plugin, which works for Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. Now, obviously, I don't want to use noise reduction on every single shot because it does soften up your images quite a bit, but if there's a shot that I really like and it has a lot of noise, I'll simply add Neat Video to the clip and tweak the settings, maybe add a little bit of sharpening, and oftentimes this will actually make the clip look a lot better. So that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at daniel.schiffer, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!